Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to SoCal Loopers. If this is your first time, so glad you're joining us. If you've been here before, you know what we do. We are a local support group that has grown beyond local, and our goal is that everyone gets to learn as much as they can. Sometimes people are better at listening and hearing it rather than reading it. So I will do what I have to do, which is always the disclaimer that Loop is a do-it-yourself closed loop algorithm and user interface. It may seem obvious, but please consult your healthcare professionals or whoever you trust to help you with your diabetes management. Please understand that this project is experimental and not approved by the FDA for therapy, and that you take full responsibility for building and running your system, and you do so at your own risk. This is particularly important today because we are doing little tips and tricks and hacks that we use as loopers that's even beyond the regular do-it-yourself stuff, and it's really in the spirit of do-it-yourself. So this should be kind of fun today. So anyway, welcome everybody. We're also live on Facebook, SoCal Loopers, so you can go either way. But I want to share with you two of my hacks, or two of my newest things that I've been trying. We were fortunate to get Omnipod looping on April 22nd, 2019. One of our presenters today is the sole reason we got it as soon as we did. And I switched over on April 24th. So I gave it 2 days and then I jumped. And with that, I used to be an Omnipod user, so I was familiar with Omnipod, but if you weren't, what you find is that it is bigger and it's a little heavier on your skin. And so I started paying attention to where people were wearing the pods. And one of our speakers today had a picture posted where she had her pod on her shoulder blade. So if you took your right hand, patted yourself on the back on your left shoulder blade, slap a pod there, and it has been an extraordinary space to use. It's only a little annoying if you take Pilates and you do shoulder stands, but other than that, it's pretty much virgin territory, and it works really well. So that's one of my hacks. The other is a silly one, which I will share. And because pods are not the prettiest things I've ever seen, I just decorate them. The difficulty is if I have a pod that fails, I'm disappointed because it's usually one I really like. So if you have young podders, or if you feel like you're just wanting to be creative, there is a Facebook group called Pimp My Pod. You'll see some pretty wild designs, and it's a lot of fun. So that's my one fun thing that I was going to share today. And then I think we'll just get on with the program. One other place that I use my pod, and I will try to show you, I put it in my forearm. And I tried that after watching Kenny Fox's 7-year-old running around with her pod on her forearm, and I thought, ooh, that's going to hurt. It's really a cool place, and it doesn't get bumped off. So if you're looking for more places to stick this thing, ask me, ask Teresa, ask some of the young people on here. There are lots of ways to do this.
So I kind of focused most of my information on using Loop with Afrezza. I've been using Afrezza and Loop since 2018.
How long have you had type 1?
I have had type 1 for September will be 22 years.
Do you remember the date?
Labor Day,
Ooh.
1998.
Okay.
I was supposed to go to Six Flags.
Kirsten, are you good to go? Okay. It's really nice to meet you, and it's really, really fun to introduce you to this group. Carson Wedding is a teenager? Yes,
Yes,
still?
ma'am. I'm 17.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Oh, cool. And she is truly the reason we were able to get the access to Omnipod this soon. Her dad is James Wedding, who is one of the founders of Night Scout. And as I understand it, you can correct me, Carson did not want to go on a tube pump. I think
No.
it was quite an exciting development, but I think you were totally the impetus. I love your dad, and I'm so excited that you're here today. So do what you do.
So I didn't really have any tips and tricks prepared, since you've mostly said just talk about looping as a teenager.
Mhm.
So I figured I would just talk about that some, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt me. So I started with Omnipod Loop, and I believe November 2018. So it was my Thanksgiving break. And we had, the first night we were looping, my blood sugar hit like 400 and capped out, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. And so my dad was up all night. I was sleeping in like my grandparents' basement in Amarillo, Texas, since we were there for Thanksgiving. And we figure out that my pod just hadn't gone in right and the tube was out, and I wasn't getting any insulin. So we did a pod change. It's like 3 a.m. And by the time I wake up, I'm at like 105 and flat. And so we're like, okay, this is working now. Jessica, I'm 17. I will be a senior in high school this year. Sorry. So looping,
You had never gone on a tube pump with Loop?
no, ma'am.
No way you were going to do that.
No.
Okay.
I started with an Omnipod about a year after I was diagnosed. I've had diabetes 9 years now, so that was 2011 I was diagnosed.
Okay.
And 2012 I started Omnipod. And at that time I danced competitively, and so tubes just weren't an option. And then when I started high school, I started marching band, so that also was an issue. I think.
So I'm sorry, you said you started on Omni Loop in November, which meant you got it 6 months ahead of all of us.
Yes, ma'am. I think
Good girl.
I think my dad told me I was part of the first 5.
How exciting.
So I had a lot of bribery to get me to guinea pig, but on the bright side, I have my college application essays already written for me, so that's good. It was a great experience. One of the big things was I got an Apple Watch out of the whole deal. And honestly, my favorite part of Loop is being able to bolus from my watch. I feel like a lot of times the issues with teenagers and not taking care of their diabetes isn't they're self-conscious, that they just forget. And so being able to control that from my watch has made that a lot easier on me. And it's not like a whole process to get stuff out, bolus, put everything away.
Where do you wear your pod?
My pod's either on my stomach or my back. I used to wear them on my legs a lot, but then I got some scar tissue buildup, so I can't as much anymore.
Okay. So you don't use it in your arm. Is that too obvious?
I did for a while. When I started marching band, I just started sweating them off.
Okay. What instrument do you play?
I'm in the color guard.
Cool. Very cool. I want to be you in my next life. So do you have friends who are on the Loop with you that you have in your,
No.
through your dad, you know people, but anybody in your community?
Teresa.
Okay.
I babysit for her, and she'll come over to my dad's parties a lot. So she actually got started on Loop. I think it was New Year's Day, after my dad threw a New Year's Eve party, and Teresa saw me looping with a pod, and she's like, I want that. Jessica, color guard.
Jessica is in Israel, so she doesn't quite know.
Gotcha.
Right.
So it's not JROTC, it's part of the marching band. So I spin a flag it's more for decoration and for performing rather than a military thing.
Any tricks you have for like how you eat when you guys go out with your friends? Is there anything that you do specially with your loop?
Depending on where we go, I may occasionally put in an override just to start with. So I'll give myself more insulin than I typically would, and then just guess on the carbs, and then Loop can typically figure it out pretty well.
Okay, so you're happy now and you're okay. You've stayed on Omnipod and Loop is the thing for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you're so cute. Where are you going to college next year?
I'm a junior right now. I'll be a senior in the fall. Sorry.
Okay, so you've got a while to go.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody have any questions for Carson? I just think it's very courageous of you to jump on here, so thank you.
Of course.
Anybody remember when you were like 17? I didn't have the technology you have, so I think you're very fortunate.
Definitely.
We had urine testing, so it was more difficult. Will you stay on while we go on? And if anyone has questions for you as we go, or you have things to jump on, you can add in.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Teresa Hastings is a type 1. She's probably been looping the longest of all of us on here today. She lives in Colorado, and she's just a really cool type 1. You see her all over Looped. She's done some work with JDRF and with, I think, Diabetes Sisters. And she's got a bunch of hacks and tricks and tips that she's used. And I'm just going to turn it over to Teresa.
Okay, so what I've done is I just took a couple of screenshots of different opportunities to use Afrezza with Loop. Some of them are kind of old because, like I said, I've done this since summer of 2018. I was at a conference and Afrezza was there, and I was able to get my hands on some Afrezza to try. And it's been an important part of my looping ever since. So
there you go. You got it.
You guys got it? Okay, perfect. Okay, so the first screen, I have a little blurb right there saying kind of what happened. And by the way, I'm not a perfect looper. I'm I like to live. So Loop helps me not think about it as much. And so this one from November was where I used Afrezza all day long. So you can see on the bottom, there are no carb entries. I took Afrezza immediately after I ate. And some of these meals were like cereal, and some of these meals were kind of longer carb meals. I believe this one, this one, the Afrezza 2 unit and Afrezza 4 unit, that I believe was pizza. So when using Afrezza, they only come in 4 unit, 8 unit, or 12 units. And the way I got 2 units is I took some empty Afrezzas and popped off the top and kind of half and half a 4 unit into 2 unit doses. So for example, with this 6 p.m. meal, it was pizza. So I knew I didn't need a ton up front. So I took 2 unit when I started to peak, and then it started creeping back down, and then it started going back up when that fat and protein kicked in. And so I did a 4 unit, and that might've been a little too much because I dropped low, but that was because of Loop also helping.
Because Afrezza is not a precise dosing, do you just take an approximation of half of it to get to 2 units?
Yeah, and honestly, as you know, a person with type 1, it's with having to focus so much on exact carb counting, it's actually really nice to just be able to look at a plate and say, that's maybe this much. And with Afrezza, it's best to underestimate the carb count because it's in and out of your system so fast. It's out in 2 hours, like completely out, no tail, like it's gone. Completely out of your system in 2 hours. So if, like here, you take 2 units and then you see yourself starting to creep back up, you don't have to worry about stacking insulin. You just say, oh, well, I obviously need more, so you take more. I probably could have gotten away with another 2 for that dose, but yeah, I love that I don't have to carb count really when I use Afrezza. I just have to say, well, this is a lot of carbs. I probably need a 4, or I probably need an 8.
So
And I even make 6s.
2 units gives you about 1.25 units of insulin. Is about.
It's not really, so you can't really say, you can't really equate it to injected insulin, because what's not used is gone. And because it's gone so fast, it's kind of like a timing thing. So if you don't use it all in 2 hours, there's no tail that's going to keep it in your system. It's just gone. So if you take 2 units, but you really only needed 1 unit, you're probably going to be okay. However, if you needed 2 units and you took 12 units, then that's a little different because you have a ton of insulin in your system.
How do you let Loop know that there's Afrezza, or where do you put it in the Apple Health app, or?
So what I do is I have an IFTTT on my phone, and I put a note in Night Scout because like we talked about with dosing, 4 units of Afrezza is not like 4 units of Fiasp or Novolog or Humalog. So if I told Loop I took 4 units and it was adjusting my dosage because it thinks I have 4 units of active insulin, then it's going to suspend me for a lot longer than I need to be suspended because the curve of insulin is so different for Afrezza.
So have you ever overdosed with Afrezza?
Yes, but not. It's really kind of unique. Let me see. This one is kind of a good example. Technically, this was an overdose. I forgot to bolus for lunch at around 1 o'clock. Didn't tell Loop about it. Didn't do anything. So I started to spike. Loop kind of worked, but I was staying high. So I took 4 units of Afrezza and immediately started to go down. But I probably should have just taken 2 units because I obviously went down too far. And it's hard to tell with Loop whether it's the Afrezza that made me drop or if it's the extra insulin that was in my system because of my high temps that contributed to the dropping. So with Afrezza, it typically it just like shuts off. And it's kind of interesting to where it'll curve, it'll kind of drop low and then just stabilize when the 2 hours is up, Afrezza.
Are you finding any side effects from the inhaling portion of it?
I personally have not. My lung function increased. You have to take a lung function test before you can start Afrezza, and then 6 months after, or 3 months after, I can't remember, it's been a while. But my lung function actually increased in that time period.
So do you have a trick on how you don't inhale and start coughing?
No, I still kind of cough. So I don't really have a tip on that.
my trick is taking the little inhaler and point it towards the roof of my mouth. But before I do that, take some water or something to drink before, so I'm not dry in my throat. And I do a steady inhale up towards the back, not a fast inhale, because if I do a fast inhale, I can see myself coughing it right back out.
I'll have to try that because I always cough. It just happens. It feels like it's part of aphrasa for me. So I'll definitely try that. That's a good tip. In November, I was using the FPU branch, or the fat protein carb branch. And so what I did is, you can tell there are carb entries for this one, but in reality, what happened was I took aphrasa, and then later, about an hour later, I went and entered the carbs for that meal, and took the I can't click. I took the insulin for the fat protein portions, and then the aphrasa for the carb portions. And it worked pretty well. This one was a little iffy, but I was pretty proud of using the FPU branch. Jeez, sorry guys, it keeps going back and forth. There. I used the, I really liked how the FPU branch and aphrasa worked together. But it did require me to put in the carbs and all the data about an hour after I ate, just to make sure that Luke knew about
Why did you stop using that branch?
I stopped using it because I couldn't combine it with the microbolus branch. I tried, and I'm not that smart. So I dropped the FPU branch and switched over to the microbolus branch.
So do you use aphrasa every day?
No.
Okay.
No, right now the microbolus branch is working pretty well for me, so I haven't needed aphrasa as much. But there still comes the occasion, and I have that one further down on the screenshots, where whenever I have a stubborn high, my first go-to is aphrasa, because it'll work immediately and drop me. I
usually tell people that it's a fabulous rescue medication to have on hand. It just, yeah, a stubborn high, it will work when nothing else does.
Yep.
And it won't put you low. It'll just land you sweetly.
So this one was a really bad low. I still can't explain it, but I had a really bad low. I kept treating, wouldn't help, and then I started to skyrocket. And so I took aphrasa, and it kind of stopped my skyrocket in its tracks. And then obviously, Luke kind of messed up, so my settings were definitely off. But I just want to focus on this portion of it, where I started to skyrocket, took aphrasa as a quick fix, and it just kind of stopped the skyrocket when I hit about looks like 140. This one is where I had a stubborn high, or did I think I already showed that one. Maybe not. Anyway, so I had a stubborn high, or somewhat stubborn. Took aphrasa, forgot to loop, or forgot to bolus. Dropped, and because of this, because Luke was also compensating for it, I dropped low, but I still didn't go below 60. So it was actually a pretty nice recovery. And then for dinner, I didn't enter any carbs at all, and I only used aphrasa. This last one is a recent one. This is what was the stubborn high that I couldn't get to go away. You can tell from the bottom that this is recent because it's, you know, May 23rd of this year. You can see all of those microboluses from the microbolus branch. And so I bolused for the food, I bolused for all the food that I took, even accounted for it, and Loop still couldn't catch up. So one of those is probably off, or my pump site was off, or something. So I took Afrezza, and immediately, within 5 minutes, started to tank. And then as soon as all the insulin was gone, I just flatlined. And so that's kind of what I often see when correcting a high, a stubborn high even, with Afrezza, is you see this rapid 2 arrows down drop that normally would terrify you. And then it's just like a 90-degree flat line that you get when Afrezza is done. And there's no tail, there's nothing left, and you're good to go.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? You see it going and you get ready for it, and then it quiets down. It is rather amazing. Wouldn't you think most endos should make sure T1s have this in their toolkit?
I think if you can use it and know how to use it appropriately, definitely. I also think that it's not ideal for somebody who has any kind of breathing trouble or lung issues. So I think it's definitely good on a case-by-case basis, but I do wish that more endos recommended it for their patients, because it is such a remarkable thing. And it does make life with diabetes so much easier, because it takes away so much math that you don't have to count your carbs anymore. And you don't have to, if you didn't take enough, then you just take a little bit more. And the risk of dropping severely low is minimal. And then underdosing is kind of a non-issue, because you just take a little more, because you can't really stack it.
Where I've gotten into trouble is I've bolused and bolused to try to bring something down, and then I take a hit of Afrezza, and then I've stacked.
Right.
So I think it's wise to, if you're going to do it up front, instead of stacking insulin.
Yeah, I think with Loop especially, it's a good idea to kind of look and see what Loop has done, and maybe take a 2-unit Afrezza if you're really having a stubborn high, instead of what you would normally take, just because Loop has already done some things. And
very cool.
So Californians are probably way ahead of us Minnesotans here. But just to let you guys know, I'm diabetes educator background. Working with a couple health systems, endos and diabetes educators are very far and few familiar with Afrezza. When it comes to it, I was pretty unfamiliar with it too. So you really have to seek out your educator or your endo. You might, almost need to switch unless you have a good relationship with them. But I think it's a good option for those people kind of with the rage bolus. They got that day, it's just not coming down. It's a good thing to try, or advanced users.
So Amanda asked how insurance is with Afrezza. And I can't speak to each individual insurance company, obviously, but in the US, MannKind, who makes Afrezza, has a program called MannKind Cares. And if you call them, then they will talk with your insurance and give you a month's worth of Afrezza for free until they can get your insurance covered, or insurance to cover Afrezza. So you just have to go through MannKind Cares.
And Medicare pay, I think there had to be a prior auth on Medicare, but they pay fully, which has been amazing. IFTTT, could you just really speak quickly to that? I didn't ask you to do anything more on that, but And I think Kenny, you probably have stuff to say on that, but is it a tool you use? Is it set up as a button you push on your phone?
Yes. So I can actually show. So it's on my phone. Ooh, there we go. So this is on the swipe side. So you're like on the main screen, swipe back. So at the very top, oh, there we go. I have 3 buttons. So when I take a 4, a 12, an 8, or a 4, and I actually changed the 12 because I never take a 12. So now the 12 is actually my 2. But when I push one of those, it automatically puts a note in my my Night Scout report that this time is when I took a dose of Afrezza. So I don't have to like go to Night Scout, put it in, and go through all the steps. Whenever I do it, I just have to swipe and push the button.
Well, you got it. You got it covered. Okay. Thank you. I think that was really great. So next up, let's go to Syra. Syra Gallo is a type 1. She's married to a type 1. She has 2 little girls, and one has type 1 diabetes as well. So if you talk about pros, she's a pro. And she's really involved in the community. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you, Syra. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I don't consider myself a pro. Kind of like Teresa said, I am not a perfect looper. I started looping a couple of years ago because with 3 diabetics in the house, it was a lot to keep track of, and I needed something to make my diabetes easier because I noticed a correlation on the days where Isla, my daughter's blood sugars were great, mine were crap, and vice versa. When mine were great, hers weren't. So it was like, I obviously only have headspace to take care of one of us. And so that's why I started looping after I met Joanne actually and Gary Shiner at a Friends for Life conference, and literally went home and bought a Riley Link that day. So I was looping for about a year and some before Omnipod Loop became a thing. Maybe a year and a half, I want to say. And so the day Omnipod Loop was available, I had already had a Riley Link ready and got Isla started like the exact same day it came out for the public. So after you, Carson. And I had already basically tested it out and felt safe using it for Isla, who was 3 and some at that point. And then we got my husband looping. I don't know, it feels like it's been a bit. It's been a little bit. He was on the 670G and switched over after he got really jealous of us not having to calibrate. So that's kind of our background. But I consider myself not a perfect looper at all. We definitely have a lot of highs and lows in this house, mainly because my reason for looping is to essentially lower the mental burden or lessen the mental burden around type 1. I'm not trying to have super low A1Cs or more time in range is obviously the goal always, and just less work. So that's why we loop. I think it's the best option for our family at this point with how much diabetes there is. So a couple of mine's going to feel a little all over the place. I don't necessarily have like a specific topic, but just little things that I think have helped me.
Let me jump in for a real quick second. First of all, it's really nice to hear you and Teresa not be perfect. There's an awful lot of people who race, my A1C was 5.2 or 5.3, and then you go, what am I doing wrong? Am I being a bad looper? Shouldn't loop do better for me? And there is a quality of life issue, and some people have a metabolism that's easier than others. It's really nice to see normal stuff. So thank you for being that honest. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. I am a big believer in A1Cs are literally just a in-between number of your highs and lows. So having a low A1C for me always means that I'm having too many lows. That's all it is. So I'm actually trying to get mine up because when I'm in the 5s, it means I've had way too many urgent lows and I don't feel my lows. So that's just a whole another issue I have. But yeah, so a couple of things that have helped me with Loop, specifically with Omnipod. So my husband's looping with Medtronic. We've both gone back and forth between Medtronic and an Omnipod. And priming is the one thing that I realized we never did with my daughter pre-looping, because Omnipod doesn't really have that same way of priming the way Medtronic does. So essentially every time we do a site change, I put in 5 fake carbs and put it in that it's only acting for about 30 minutes. And that usually helps prevent the spike that comes with a site change. All of this depends on what our blood sugars are when we're doing a site change. And it, you know, if my daughter's low, I'll skip that part, but usually that helps prevent the spike right after.
That's a really interesting point, because no one really talks about that, but very often in a site change, you don't get absorption right away.
It's basically just pushing. So I've had a lot of people not fully understand that. So if you're going from tubing, it's easier to understand the prime that happens, like the fixed prime that happens after the cannula inserts your body. For Medtronic, you do that prime before the cannula is even inside of you. Whereas with Omnipod, you don't do that. So after the cannula is actually inserted in your body, there's like this tiny amount that's empty, right? There's no insulin in there. And so you want to kind of push that insulin through. Otherwise, the next bolus you do, or even the next hour of a basal, depending on your basal rates, may not actually be going through. And I have found that it's usually about half a unit's worth for me that needs to get pushed through. For my daughter, I'm a little more conservative and I'll do about like whatever it takes to get about 0.25 units through, just because that makes a much bigger difference in her body than mine. And it's not an exact science. It's just kind of been like, you know, trial and error. So don't do 5 carbs for you. Figure out exactly how much, you know, you want to trial and error and see what works better for you. Maybe for you, that's only 0.1 units. Maybe for you, that's 0.5. Everyone's a little bit different.
So if I understand correctly, you take that into factor as well as what your blood sugar is at that moment. So if if your daughter is at 75, you probably won't do that. Or you may.
It depends on I mean, like with everything with diabetes, there's so many factors, right? So is she about to eat? In that case, yeah, I probably will still do it. Especially if Luke's been cutting her off already, then I'll probably still do it, right? But if she's 100, but she's playing outside, maybe I won't do it, right? It just, there's so many different variables to it. For myself, I pretty much always use it. And for the most part, it's worked out. If anything, I haven't done enough. There's more times that I forget to do it than I don't. So I try, like I said, I'm not a perfect diabetic at all. There's so many times where I've done a site change and I'm just glad it's done, forget to do that one step. So yeah, it's just, that's the one tip for people who have experienced the highs after site changes that has helped us. I know not everybody does. So yeah.
Along those lines, very often people on the 3rd day of, thank you, Glenn, of their pod or even their infusion set get less absorption. And what I have done, if I start to see that happening on day 3, I just have an override of 20% higher. If I don't feel like changing the pod early, I just throw an override in. So it's just trying to compensate for absorption and time.
That makes sense. We typically will do site changes about every 2 to 2.5 days for my daughter specifically. She just has she has really sensitive skin, so keeping a cannula in her for too long is never a good idea. For myself, I'll keep it on past the 8 hours that you're supposed to until it does this scream of death. But for her, I'll usually pull it off early. And then the other tip that has helped me, at least as a parent, is using Night Scout. Not just using it, but essentially what we do is we have we live in like a 3-story condo, and so we have an iPad that's just set up on both, like in our bedroom and then in the downstairs like area, where it just has Night Scout up on like the thing where it won't go off that screen, the lock screen. So no matter where we are, we can always see what her blood sugars are at glance, like at a really quick glance, just to be like, all right, what do we need to do, without having to stop, pick up my phone. My hands might be dirty, I might be cooking, or whatever it is that I'm doing. I can just really quickly take a glance at it and see how much insulin she has on board and what her blood sugar is without having to stop and do anything else. So that's just really helpful as a mom, because I feel like, if anything, there's enough that we have to do with diabetes, and taking the extra steps that we have to take out of it and just making something easier is always helpful. Another thing that's really helpful for us, both for myself and for my daughter, is Tidepool, the mobile app specifically. Because again, the limitation with Loop is you can see what you've done for the last 24 hours, right? But let's say I wanted to see how gymnastics affected my daughter. Well, not lately, but back when we were actually interacting with the world, to see what a different activity or a different type of food for the first time, how it impacted either myself or my daughter from like 2 weeks ago. You can't go back and loop and see what you did, right? But with Tidepool, you can type in, with the Tidepool mobile app, you can type in, okay, this is what I had and this is how I handled it. Whether it's saying, okay, this is how many carbs I entered, but I didn't actually bolus for all of it. Just giving a little bit more context over what you did and how you did it and whether that worked or not, because it'll show you essentially like, this is how that worked out. And maybe even type in your recommendations for what you think you would do later. Because I'm not going to remember that anytime later. If it was a month ago, I'm not going to remember what I did. And I'm not going to remember what I thought I should have done instead. So typing it into Tidepool and then being able to search for it, like, hey, when I ate at that one place for the first time, this is how I handled it. And this is what I would do next time. That's really helpful because essentially it's kind of keeping that information for you and not having to remember anymore. And then let's see, the only other thing I can think of that I have been able, well, there's two things that I've been able to do easier, essentially live my life more the way I would want to, thanks to Loop, are exercise. It took me a while, but I'm not an athlete by any measures. I'm just like an average mom that's trying to sometimes exercise when she can. And the most intense thing I do is go to spin classes every now and then, although I haven't in a couple of months. And the way it's always worked out great for me is finally realizing not to go into exercise with a lot of insulin on board. And so there being very specific times that actually work out. And I usually like to eat something like a Perfect Bar right before. I will put in my override for exercise. So I use overrides a lot in Loop, whether for myself or for my daughter. And so I have an exercise override mode, which basically says that I need about 70 to 80% less, depending on the different exercise I'm doing, with a different target blood sugar. And so I'll set that like an hour beforehand. And usually I will eat something similar to a Perfect Bar right before going in to work out. And then usually about midway through a class, so when there's like 20 minutes left to a class, I'll turn that off and go into post-workout mode, which is the opposite. And it's like 140% override, and bolus in the middle of class, which is really nice to do from your watch. It's a lot easier than when I was in tubing and I would like sit on my bike and stop and pull out my tube and everybody's like, what is this weirdo doing? I'm the girl that like eats Skittles while spinning and then like pulls out my insulin pump at the same time. And yeah, doing that midway through class versus waiting till after class, to prevent that adrenaline spike that I get after a workout. Obviously this depends on the specific type of workout that you're doing, and everyone's different. Whereas, more low impact stuff doesn't do that to me. Running, I do a completely different thing. Like every exercise is a little bit different, but the biggest thing is don't work out with insulin on board and figure out what overrides work for you. And keep in mind, just depending on what it is you're doing, you might need an override to help with the adrenaline spike after. And the only other thing that I can talk about having been able to do because of Loop is fasting. So I'm Muslim and I observed Ramadan for the whole of last month. And that is not something I was ever able to do pre-Loop. And I can talk more about that if anybody is interested, but that's the only other thing I can really talk about as far as like having been impacted because of Loop specifically.
I think that's great. I just have a question I want to throw back to Carson, because you were born into Night Scout. You're automatically a Night Scout person. Do you use Night Scout? Do you use Tidepool?
Wait, sorry. Who are you asking?
Carson.
Okay.
Carson, yeah.
So we use Night Scout most of the time. My parents both use it. I don't really look at it. I open Tidepool about every week to ping it for the JABE studies. So but personally, I don't use them. I probably should. But when I'm looking back at trends, it's either Dexcom Clarity or through Night Scout.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to come back to Cyrus. Someone did ask about settings for fasting.
So they changed throughout the month, but the first week or so, I basically had a override that kept me at 30% less insulin across the board while I was fasting. And then the opposite in the times that I was eating, because you're eating at totally different times than your body is used to usually, because you wake up at like, 4 a.m. to eat. And then you would eat after sundown. So those are times that my body just wasn't used to it. So figuring out carb ratios and that kind of stuff was different. And for me, what worked was having like 130% more of the times I was eating and then 30% less during the day. And that slowly changed. So about second or third week of fasting, I drastically changed. So my body essentially adjusted and I didn't need those overrides when I was eating anymore. I have a whole blog post that I can share with you where I talk specifically about settings and how I change them in Loop.
All righty. We're going to move on to Kenny. Most of you have heard Kenny talk in the past. Kenny, again, is the dad of Tessa, who's 7 years old. He's also, his mother's grandmother is now looping. She's 93. And she's been looping now for a couple of weeks. I think that's pretty extraordinary. And she probably wins a record for being the oldest looper on the face of the earth. But anyway, thanks, Kenny. It's yours.
So I'll start actually with one of my last things is off of what Sarah was saying. She's got a device up, an iPad up with Night Scout in the house. We have an Android phone, just an old phone in the house. Same thing. I kind of like blue tape it to the wall for a while and it fell down a bunch and the screen cracked, but it didn't matter because I wasn't using the phone. Eventually I got a pop socket, and you can buy these a couple $1 pop socket holders that stick to the wall. So we have that up in the kitchen and a little power cord running to it. So it's mounted up on a wall. If you got devices sitting around your house, you can throw Night Scout on them. So, but along those lines, you can, for those of you that have multiple loopers in the house, you can have in Night Scout Dev, if you're in the Dev version of 13, I'm sure it'll be in the next major release, you can set up a split. So it's just a simple thing they built where you just put a bunch of frames inside of one page. And if you go into your Heroku settings, you can set up frame _name _1. I think it goes up to 8 or 12 or something like that. And then you put the frame _URL, the number, and the site for the Night Scout site you want. And then the primary site that you're setting this up on, you can just go to /split, and it will show you, it'll piece them all up depending on how many you have, right? 4 will be an even set of 4, a grid of 4, and that kind of stuff. So I just have 2 in this case. That's actually my daughter and grandma, I think. Maybe, I can't remember, this might have been somebody else. I just set this up for, but so you could do this too. So if you had like an iPad, I have it set up on the small Android phone and horizontal, and it works okay. It's a little small to look at from across the room versus having one person on a phone. But if you had like an iPad, it might work a little better. Okay, that was quick. And the phone on the wall, covered those two, good. And then one that's not, I'm gonna do everything that's more watch related, but for right now, I'll just mention that we, for my daughter at school, one thing we've done that works pretty well for us is to enter her snack, her like morning snack, into Loop ahead of time. You can only go like 4 hours out when you enter carbs, but snacks usually like an hour and a half, 2 hours from the time she leaves the house, about 2 hours, I guess. So you can enter the snack 2 hours ahead of time. And I've found out and played with it. For most food, you got to enter like between half and 2/3 of the carbs, not all of them. Otherwise, Loop's a little too aggressive to bring down breakfast and causes a small low right before snack. But what that allows us to do is Tessa can go out to eat and not have to do anything. She just goes out with her classmates and sits down and eats. Because she's had a couple of times where snacks pretty quick. It's just a couple of minutes to eat, and then they head out for a real quick like run around time. So she has to have a teacher come over and double check her numbers, her carb entry she's doing. That's all we ask the school to do. this is what we tried in its place. So they're pretty much, I mean, she might have to like treat with a couple grapes, 1 or 2 grapes right before snack, but for the most part, she prefers that than to have to go and have to wait for someone to come over and check. So she goes out, sits, eats, and goes and plays. Everything's fine. It does help that she has recess, like full recess, lunch recess before lunch. So if we underguess on the carbs and it's a little off, it's not a big deal. It comes back down because she has like a quick class and then has recess again. So not a big deal, works well for us. So entering carbs in the future, you can play with it. It gets a little risky because Loop is more aggressive to bring you back down into range. That can also be a tip for when you're stuck high. You know, you're going to eat later and you're kind of gun shy for how much to give yourself as a manual bolus to override. You could just put the next meal out there or something close to it. And it'll give you a recommendation for giving a bolus. And if you don't start coming down in time for your meal, a lot of times Loop will recommend or temp up and give you more insulin. So okay, so the rest, I'm going to do my best to do the watch. It's going to be hard. I'm going to try to hold up to the screen. So we use the watch a lot as a caregiver tool. The person wearing the watch is the one in charge of the T1 in our case. So if I'm wearing it, it's on me. We kind of know who's the first person to react if things need to be changed. If we're, you know, she's over to grandpa's house or, you know, when she could go to other places, whoever's in charge would have at church or whatever would wear the watch. Same thing. And then Tessa wears it to school. She prefers the bullets from it at school. And it's an easy way for us to text her and she can see that she's got a message. The messages we send using that watch, I'll just text her and ask her to bolus occasionally. And because we're using the automatic bolus or micro bolus branch, usually if Loop says there's more insulin that's needed, then it's a bolus, right? So she can just tap the bolus button and take the recommendation and go on her way. So we use the watch to know who's in charge. You can also on the watch, when you enter carbs, you can change the time. I'm kind of surprised how many people don't know this, but I have a habit of clicking around and doing things I guess most people don't. So here goes. On the watch, there it goes. You have the number of carbs at the top. Oh, now it's getting fuzzy. It's trying to look at my face. I'm trying to get it. There we go. There's the time underneath that. If you touch the time, it times out real easy. If you touch the time, it lights up green. And then now you can use either the plus and minus buttons on the next to the number, or you can use the crown and change the time on the entry there. So you can change the time. So you could set things out in the future. You could also do things in the past. So you don't have to just change the absorption time and the amount. You can change the time. The reason why that's important is if you were to swipe, I think it's this way, backwards for me, and go to the second screen and tap on the active carbs, second one down, you can see a list of recent carbs. It's probably backwards for you guys too, but you can kind of get what I'm doing here. You can see the most recent carb entries, the time and the amount. That is useful if you see yourself or whoever you're managing going up and realizing, I probably messed up on the carb count, probably a little bit short. I need to add some more. One thing that would be the best thing in the world, now that we have everything else that's lovely about Loop, would be the ability to edit a carb entry, to be able to make the entry less or more, or the absorption time. You can't do that. But one thing you can do is you could, without going to bother your T1 or yourself, I guess, if your phone for some reason is somewhere you can't get to it. But I don't like to bother my daughter asking her to come to me, take her phone out. It's just like a whole friction we don't need, as much as we can avoid it. So if I need to add carbs, I'll just look at the watch, flip over to the active carbs, find the meal entry that I think I messed up on, look at the time, and then I will create a new carb entry, put it back at the same time with the same absorption time, and add the extra carbs I thought we missed, then recommend a bolus, etc. So that's a way of kind of adding carbs in. And then if you're OCD like me, when you finally do get the phone in your hand, you end up like deleting the little one and then merging it back into the new one. And so you don't have all these little entries, but you don't need to do that. Loop will handle the meal the same way, as long as both entries are the same duration and at the same time. So that's kind of a way of like adding carbs to an old entry on the watch. Something I find myself repeating a lot in little loopers especially, is that the watch reaches the phone either through Bluetooth, first go, and then backup is Wi-Fi. And what that means is if you're on the same wireless network. So if you're here in my house, the Wi-Fi covers, a little bit of the backyard and the front yard and inside, right? So we're all in the same Wi-Fi. So if I use the watch, she can be and is downstairs, not anywhere near Bluetooth range, or outside, for example. I can use the watch to add carbs, like as a pre-bolus for dinner, if we're making dinner, or if she's just going high and I want to manually bolus, and I'll figure out why it was happening later or whatever, setting an override from the watch. You can use the watch to connect to the phone from anywhere on the same network. Even at church, our church campus is fairly large. I manage the Wi-Fi, so it helps. But I can bolus her or correct or do something from anywhere on campus too. So that's nice. What that also means, practically speaking, for those of you with kids that when they go to sleep, they just like shoot up like a rocket for whatever reason. I recommend that even if you have like a preteen or whatever, and they have a watch that they use all day, that you ask to charge the watch if they're okay with it in your room, because that's what we do. I charge right next to my bed so that her watch is next to my bed and I can use the watch to bolus highs or set maybe a higher target if she's going low or something along those lines if I feel the need to do that. But I can do it without getting out of bed and not having my room. My room is next to Tessa's. She's right here in this wall. And so actually I leave her phone on my desk right here so I can hear the alarms as the backup. And I have the watch across my room over here because I'm too lazy to even move this far to do anything. So I can use the watch to do all that. But it also means as a parent, I can be spending time with my wife, talking, watching TV, doing something after bedtime and not have to run upstairs to use a PDM or an injection or whatever or grab her phone to bolus if she's going high because she just fell asleep. I can do that from the watch. That's probably the main thing that kept me looping when we were struggling at the beginning, was the fact that I could do that. So Wi-Fi range, that's important to know. And charge it in your room. Oh, one last thing for the watch. This is just general watch behavior. This is not loop specific, but if you drag up from the bottom and slide up, I have a picture I guess I can show you on the internet, but here we go. There's a little phone, looks like almost like it's a silence icon, but that's not it. If you hit that button, it will ping your phone. Usually it's used for when you can't find your phone, but you have your watch on and you want to go find it, which totally useful because at least my kid, leaves it in a room and doesn't remember where it was. It's under a blanket or something. So super useful to just find the phone real fast without making a big scene about, hey, you got to keep your phone with you or keep it on you, which she doesn't do. So so that's easy. But we have also used it at parties or things where I'm like within Bluetooth or Wi-Fi range of her, and I will use the ping to let her know that I need to talk to her or something, diabetes or not. Sometimes it's just because she's with her siblings and I can get them all to come to me if I ping the phone. But you can make it go bing, bing, bing and little sonar sound, and it can be kind of like a little, hey, I need you over here sort of thing too, if it's useful. So rather than having to run around and scream and say, you're going low, come back here, or stop running, I can just ping and she'll hear it and come find me. So there we go. There's fun with the watch. That's what I had for today.
Hey, Kenny, I have a quick question on that because I've never really bolused my watch, so I'm trying to do it now. So I get to the point that it says you need a bolus, and it has the down
Yes.
things, and then it says to touch the crown.
Yep. So you have to. She's actually not in range right now, so I'll just do this. So you get the bolus. I got to block my face. There we go.
Yeah.
You bolus, and then you see this little confirmation thing
Yep.
here. You actually just scroll the crown to confirm. Once it gets all the way down to the bottom, it'll get a little check mark and it'll go. And you can use that to confirm.
Oh, okay.
Safety feature, so you don't accidentally.
So you don't, yeah, it was easy before Pete added that to, I actually had it happen. We were sitting, reading books before bed, and I think one of the kids bumped the watch or whatever. I think it took the recommended bolus. I don't even think it was, so it wasn't dangerous. I heard it beep, and then I heard we had the pod beeps on, and I heard the pod beep. I'm like, I didn't do that. This is before auto bolus. So I looked, and sure enough, it probably had gone through the watch. So that's a nice safety feature. There is some code you can change in Loop if you're looking at geeky. I don't like how far you have to scroll the crown, maybe because we have this little like bumper case on or whatever. So I change it every time I do a build. I change it to like 70% instead of right now. It requires one full rotation of the crown, and I make it smaller because it's still safe and less annoying if I don't have to spin it as far. So, and easier for Tessa if she's actually going to bolus from it as well.
Okay, someone says this is a silly question, but as we all know, there are no silly questions. From Jenny, if you enter ahead of time, do you do the bolus? I think this might be for Syra from the watch, or does Auto Bolus Branch bolus it?
Oh, so I just enter the carbs. I don't do anything else. Loop will previously temp up, and currently with Auto Bolus or Micro Bolus, will do boluses as it sees the need. I find Loop gives it a little bit earlier than I'd like, so it works out if you just, like I said, don't enter all of it. Plus, she has recess, so it works out. But yeah, it will give insulin as it approaches the time that you're going to be eating.
It's almost like a really aggressive pre-meal.
Yeah, really aggressive pre-meal. If you put it out an hour or more, yeah, it will actually recommend. It recommends a bolus every morning when we do that. So I'll put it out 2 hours, and it'll say, "Hey, do you want to give like a half a unit or a quarter unit?" And I'm like, "Not really." It's going to anyways because that's it's doing it on its own. But it'll do it slower than if I just give the whole amount. So I don't give the recommended bolus when one pops up. Loop kind of adds it, which sometimes helps because if we mess up breakfast, it definitely keeps her from going high at school as she's driving off and then shooting up from her oatmeal or something. So that helps. But yeah, I just enter the carbs and Loop takes care of the rest well enough. And now with Auto Bolus, I don't think we were using it when she was at school. It worked a lot better, way better than the temp basal. So that was wonderful.
Okay, got 2 questions for you, Kenny. One is, can you talk about your change of the icon absorption times?
Yeah, you mean on the watch. So just that if those of you that haven't seen it, you have the icons at the bottom. You have the lollipop, the taco, and the pizza. Those all inherit from the phone. I wish you could actually change the specific absorption time because I don't know, maybe I'm too geeked out on this and pay too much attention, but I actually tweak some foods are 2.5 hours instead of 2 and things like that. Yeah, you can just use the icons. But if you change the default absorption time, which is listed in the Loop customizations in Loop Docs, pretty easy change to make. If you change 2 hour to be, this is what we did for grandma, for my wife's grandmother. 2 became 3, 3 became 4, 4 became 5. So taco is now a 4 hour, pizza is a 5 hour, because everything absorbs slower for her. So I'd rather not overdo it up front. So that's what we did. We changed the default times. If she had a watch on her phone, then when I used Lollipop or whatever the icon is on the watch, it would use the default time you have set up in the Loop app.
Okay, someone did ask about Tessa. Is she on a 50% Auto Bolus?
50. That's a great question. We had her at 50. It was great. We're using Ivan's free APS at the moment, and so I play with it. It's easier to play with. I can just change it in the app, so it's an easier experimentation. I've had her up at 60, 65% lately. Works fine too. I manually change it if it's something that I know I want to spread out more, and I can't really communicate to Loop that it's a slow enough meal other than stretching the absorption time out. So I'll go into the phone and change it. But for the most part, I've been creeping up the percentage of partial bolus application, whether in free APS or an Auto Bolus Branch, more and more, just because why not, right? Push the limits. I had her max basal at 15 times her basal rate, so I don't know, whatever. Push the limits. So, but slowly and carefully. You just watch it as it goes.
Okay, from Nancy, when using Shortcut for protein and fat, can that be from a parent phone or just the
Has to be on the phone with Apple Health. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
gotcha. Yeah, you're touching on stuff people have questions about. Let me also ask you if you want to touch at all on AutoTune. That seems to be
me. I don't. I mean, Syra uses it. I've tried it. I think it's baloney when I've used it, so I just don't bother.
Okay.
But I don't know. I have a different approach and understanding to how the system works. I know AutoTune isn't like super well designed for Loop. It's more tuned for, from what I hear, OpenAPS, but I haven't really used it for either.
Okay.
So what Syra said was spot on though. Like if you can limit the number of changes in your settings and and do some time blocks and get multiple days with settings that haven't changed, and just try to keep a couple things consistent from what I understand. And when I tried it out, it worked a lot better.
So essentially, just with this is again going off of my personal experience with Night Scout. I've never used it for my husband because he went from 670G onto Loop, and apparently his 670G settings were perfect, and
Wow.
he hasn't had to change them except for one time ever. He's changed his carb ratios. I'm a little jealous.
I don't want to hear that at all.
I have always been told that I'm a brittle diabetic. And I hate the term, but just the idea that like I've got way more settings. Like he would be fine with one basal all the time, one carb ratio all the time, one ISF, and like he's fine. Whereas for me, I've got like 10 different basals, a couple of ISFs, a couple of carb ratios, multiple override modes, like all of it, right? So your diabetes will vary, as will your auto tune results. So his is different, and then my daughter and I both are a little more similar as far as the number of settings and stuff we have. And the need for help with settings, and essentially the need for something like auto tune is greater for me. And like I said, in the first year, whenever I would try to use auto tune, I was like, this recommendation is insane. I would never do that. It's totally wrong. I don't feel comfortable with that. And the biggest thing that I realized is that in the beginning, my settings were really wrong. So then the recommendations that it was giving were based off of one, me probably not aligning any of my things right. That was when I would run auto tune with the average aspect, where it was like I had multiple ISFs. And so I was trying to I don't think auto tune even had the option to do it at different time zones at that point. Like now you can do where you just do it for a different time block, right? I think when I first started trying to use auto tune, that wasn't even an option. And so it was inaccurate because it was trying to use an average of very different settings. So having the time block makes a huge difference. So like, for example, at midnight, my settings are different from like midnight to 5 a.m., right? And then both my ISF and my carb ratios are very different. I have one basal at that time versus in the daytime, I then have another 2 different sets of blocks based off of like, I tend to need to be a little bit more aggressive around breakfast. I think most people do. There's like that dawn phenomena, weird thing that happens. And same for my daughter. We need to be a lot more aggressive during growth spurts at night. So just having, for her, there's 2 different time blocks. It's daytime versus nighttime. Very different settings. Doing one set of auto tune for nighttime. So with that ISF and that carb ratio works out really nicely versus trying to do it for all of them. But yours might not line up. If your ISF and carb ratio changes don't line up, then your auto tune results may not. You might have to do multiple ones, right? So for me, or for my daughter, I only have to do 2 different auto tunes, right? If you have, an ISF that runs for 4, maybe you have 4 different ISF settings, but then you have 7 different carb ratios. You might need to do it differently and do 7 different ones. The number of settings you have, that's the number of auto tunes you might have to run, essentially. And depending on how much it changes, that might look different. If anybody wants help kind of using auto tune and trying to see how to get the best results out of it, I'd be more than willing to kind of help look at it with you and see what you'd feel comfortable with changing based off of that. It's kind of the one thing. I know I didn't even use Night Scout for the first 6 months of looping. Anytime I had questions on the Loop group, I was probably that really annoying person because I would ask for help and they'd be like, "Where's your Night Scout reports?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So it's not everybody even uses Night Scout, and that's okay. Night Scout isn't one of those things you have to use to loop. I just personally find it really helpful now. You don't have to set it up as soon as you start looping either, but it is really helpful because whenever you do have issues, that's how people are able to help you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up unless anyone's got any burning other issues. Be aware we're all on SoCal Loopers. We watch questions that go by. Certainly tap Glenn and Kenny if you have questions, or any of us, put it out there. And let me know if you have anything else you'd like to hear about.
Answer Julie's question I just see in the Facebook. She's asking if there's a way to have the temp override show in Night Scout with the symbol you use instead of just saying temp override. The answer is yes. you need to make sure you're on the newest Night Scout, and you'll get more details about your overrides when they show up as blocks kind of at the bottom, running along the bottom of your Night Scout graph. I think it actually takes going to Night Scout 13 dev at this point to get the icons and stuff to show up in reports. So it's coming in the next version of Night Scout, but it takes dev to get the reports showing the overrides at the top on the day-to-day reports with the icon and that kind of stuff. You don't see the detail of what that override is, but you can see the icon and the name of the override instead of just a random gray bar in the day-to-day report. So make sure your GitHub repository is up to date and update Night Scout to version 13. And if you're not seeing what you want, you can try doing the same thing for dev, pull the fresh code into your dev, and then go into Heroku and deploy the dev branch instead of master, and poof, that's how you get the split screen and a little more detail on the overrides.
I got one more coming in from Sarah. Sarah, do you want to just unmute yourself and share that? It's a great idea.
So this is something that I found. It's been a little tip that I have on my Riley link. I put a tile, and it's amazing when I've rolled around in my bed at night and I'm like, where's my Riley link? And I like leave it in the bedroom, and I set the alarm off, and my kids will go run and look for it. So they're on Amazon. I don't do anything to charge it. It's automatically charged, and I ding my Riley link when I need it. So putting a tile is amazing.
I agree with that. It's especially helpful with little children who like to leave it in the weirdest corners of the room. And then also the name bubbles, Joanne, I know you've referenced it on your website as well.
Yeah.
In case you lose it, because I have, someone will call you and be like, hey, you have this thing that's a medical device. Do you need it? And I'm like, yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's important to tag your stuff. And I've also tagged my phone. So if you put a tag on, and I like name bubbles because they don't rub off and you don't get ink all over yourself. But don't put your own telephone on the name bubble that goes on your phone, because if someone's trying to reach you and they have your phone, you're not going to get the message. So have the number go to whoever is your backup or advocate if you've lost your phone. But it's a great idea. If you ever end up in the hospital, any device you use should have name tags on them. They will tag it otherwise, and they'll put it on with some sort of awful tape that doesn't come off. So better you do it, better you choose what you like to do with it. And they're giving everybody a 20% discount through the end of August. Just go onto the Savvy Diabetic and you'll see the link, but they like what we do and they're making that available. So that's great. Anything else, anybody? I think we've covered it. It's time to go out and play. Or wherever you are in the world, go to sleep or whatever you're doing. Carson and Sarah and Kenny and Teresa, who's gone. Thank you for sharing your stuff. This is do-it-yourself community. It really helps. Ask us questions and we'll bring whatever you need to the next meeting. So thank you. I hope everyone has a great day. Really nice meeting you, Carson. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.